Alright, so I want to talk about the Shield Hero books first show. This will cover book 7, which will be episodes 4 through 6 of season 2. So I mentioned in my last video about the first 3 episodes and book 6 that they skipped a ton, about 3/4 of a book, and they didn't skip quite as much of this one, but they skipped a lot and reordered some stuff and then made a bunch of minor changes also. So episode 4 starts off, we get the flashback to the prior book where we get Riccia'S backstory and the end of the last book where they roam around the tortoise back to try to figure out how to seal it. And this is where the pretty big changes are. This episode is the main one. So in the show, this is where they go inside the tortoise. But in the book, they can't find the entrance to the tortoise, so they leave. So the prologue of the book, they hear a bunch of people screaming and they run toward it. And they're being attacked by the bat familiars, which are the tortoises. So they figure out that it's not actually dead because its familiars are still roaming the area. And they're looking for the heroes, which is why they're kind of wandering around. And they've heard a bunch of stories that are all similar enough to where Naofumi thinks they're probably true, that essentially they went to fight this tortoise and just disappeared and no one ever saw him again. It's been about a week since they killed the tortoise, which is unlike the show where they're up there for one night on its back and then it starts regenerating the next day. So going into the next chapter, everything gets ramped up. And this kind of bums me out because the show rushes it. But I love that in the book, they celebrated victory and they were relaxed and kind of in a good mood. And then the tortoise just comes back and they're pretty far away and can't do anything about it. And they run into a new familiar here, the amalgamated parasite type, which is essentially a chimera. And they briefly showed one in the show, but it keeps regenerating when they attack it. So they're really having a hard time with it. And then Kyo'S shows up and she helps them. So they keep attacking and attacking, but it won't go away until she holds it in place. And then this time when they attack it, it stops regenerating. She's pretty cool in the books. She has like a lot of sway over the familiars. And she has some pretty powerful magic. And she's useful in figuring out stuff, but not quite as much as the show, I would say. The show really ramped it up to where she's just like, oh, let's go here. And you need to do this and this and this. In the book, it slowly comes to her over the course of a couple books, and a lot of her answers are like not complete confidence. But Naofumi tends to trust her judgment anyway, just because. Anyway, Naofumi uses the Shield of Wrath to finish off this parasite, and he really hates using it. In the book, it's a pretty big deal every time he does, because he really suffers each time, and he's really afraid of being consumed by it. So this is where Kyo'S formally introduces herself as a human familiar of the tortoise. And she explains about the collecting the souls to make the barrier, and that it was sealed away. And she explains that the hourglass is the power level of the waves, but she doesn't actually know much about the waves. And she says she doesn't think it's right that heroes are coming through. She doesn't know anything about that. And then she tells him that her true body, the tortoise, hasn't been defeated. It's been taken over by someone else, and they're collecting the energy but not using it to make a barrier. And she explains that she can't control the tortoise but can interfere with familiars and use magic. And she doesn't know how her magic will behave once they get close to the tortoise either. Naofumi tries to teleport to the tortoise, but it's blocked because the tortoise is so massive that it's messing with his teleportation ability. So he teleports back to Melromark, and the queen says she knows Kyo'S, and they find out that the tortoise started moving again, and a bunch of soldiers who were in the area were lost. The next chapter starts with the tortoise reaching Melromark, like the edge of Melromark, and heading straight for the castle. And this is a huge bummer to me that this is all skipped, because this is a great fight in the book. You get the revived tortoise, who they thought was dead, marching on Melromark with no one to stand up to it. And then this is where the missiles come in. Unlike the show, they brought the missiles in pretty much right away. But in the book, this is where the missiles come in. And he starts doing like distance attacks. It doesn't use the missiles before, but now it is, and it's just ravaging everything. So Naofumi and his party ride in a carriage led by Philo and have a strategy meeting on how to deal with it. And this is kind of similar to the meeting you see in the show, where Kyo'S is introduced as a familiar to the other leaders and they want to sacrifice her. And Naofumi goes off on them about how they don't view the heroes as anything but sacrifices. And he says that they're no better than the tortoise. And he pretty much says, if you guys are all going to be dicks, I'll just sit back and watch you all die. And I like this side of Naofumi in the books because it really gets pronounced that he's kind of an asshole, but he doesn't usually take it too far. And I think it makes him a lot more interesting character instead of just being sort of a generic hero good guy that I feel like the show is sort of aiming for. Their plan is essentially that the shield hero and his party will cut its head off again and buy some time. And they say that the tortoise is stopping while it moves anywhere from half an hour to 2 hours, and there are less familiars around because of the missiles. And then Ost explains that the tortoise is stopping to absorb power from the earth to shoot the spikes from its shells. So she suggests that they wait for it to get to an area where it doesn't have that much energy to absorb. The next chapter starts by saying that it's an hour later and the tortoise is moving again. And this is where Rishia and the queen and the others have been researching on how to kill it, and they suggest going into the body. And Naofumi is annoyed because now he has to get on the back of it while it's moving. So they run full speed with Philo in the carriage, and he uses his shooting star shield to protect everybody, which is like his favorite shield in the book. It covers an area around him for his party, and it keeps everyone else out. He likes to use it a lot. There's a neat little thing in here too that we don't get to see where Ost uses her gravity magic, so everyone is floating in the back of the carriage instead of bouncing around and getting sick. And it's all these little details that I'm a little bit bummed that we don't get to see in the show, because I think little details like that really flesh out the world building and the characters. So Philo dodges around the missiles and they finally get close. The tortoise uses his mouth beam again, and it's way more powerful than it was before. So everyone's casting support magic on Naofumi while he blocks it, and Ost puts her hand on his shield and his power level goes way up for protecting them. And when it finally ends, Raphtalia and Philo attack it, and they cut its head off, but this time it comes back immediately. This is a great scene in the book that we're not going to get in the show because of how they did the show and how rushed it was, where they cut its head off for a second time only for it to come back immediately. And then the tortoise tries to stomp on them, and they use the chance to run away. And they're all exhausted after just this one brief encounter with the tortoise. So in the next chapter, they say that the only way they can seal it is to get to the heart. Vittoria talks to Naofumi through Philo's Calic and says that if Naofumi can stall it, she'll get there as fast as she can to fight it while they kill it from the inside. But she says she can't get there for an hour. And this sets up something epic that they put into the show. They kind of jammed it into this most recent episode where you get this giant monster duel. And their strategy is to draw its attention while they evacuate Melromark and wait for Vittoria in the book. And he puts Raphtalia, Rishia, Eclair, and the old lady in charge of evacuation. So it's only him, Philo, and Ost who go to battle the tortoise and delay it. And Naofumi is able to hold its leg down for a minute and it launches spikes. And this is also a familiar, which Ost is capable of sucking the magic out of. So she ends up with kind of a limitless supply of magic from these spikes that are familiars. And when the tortoise realizes that Naofumi is holding its leg, it uses its beam on him. So he switches to the Shield of Wrath here, which he hates doing. And he sees a timer in his vision that says 4 minutes and 37 seconds. And he realized that he was out of SP, which is mana, essentially, or mana. The timer was for the Shield of Wrath, and he doesn't know what will happen when it hits 0. And I love this part of the book that got skipped because you have all this stuff going on with the evacuation of Melromark, him struggling with the tortoise, him struggling with the Shield of Wrath, Ost being really helpful with her magic, and then a giant monster fight like on the way. He uses his Shield of Wrath to counter an attack, and the curse burns up his leg and face, but it regenerates almost instantly, so it doesn't really do him any good. So he alternates with the Soul Eater shield because that lets him take damage, but it protects his mana, and the Shield of Wrath. He gets sent Ricolu fruit, which is the alcohol fruit that nobody is supposed to be able to eat, but he eats them like they're candy, and they restore his energy. So this just goes on like round after round of him with the tortoise, and he's alternating shields, and his Shield of Wrath falls to 30 seconds, and he thinks it's going to consume him when it gets to 0. And Ost casts a spell to get rid of some of the curse in the shield, and the timer jumps back up to 3 minutes, but her hands are burnt from it because they're like burnt by a curse, so it doesn't heal right away. And his armor gets destroyed beyond recognition, and it's too bad that this couldn't be animated because this is an awesome fight in the series. I've seen a lot of people online say that they think the Spirit Tortoise arc is boring, but I thought all of this stuff was awesome, where it's just Naofumi versus this mountain-sized turtle, and they're just going round after round, and he's really acting heroic here. So he gets to the point where he finally is considering a retreat so that he doesn't die, and Vittoria shows up in the distance, and she kicks his head, but it snaps right back into place. And the chapter ends with Naofumi retreating to safety to let the two monsters fight. So the next chapter starts with Vittoria saying that she can't break the shell, but she'll fight it as long as she can until they can kill it. And then after she keeps bashing its head, it actually regenerates with 2 heads to fight her, but the beams are less powerful. And they notice now that the spikes on the back look way sharper and that the village is completely gone. We cut to them looking around, and they trust Ost on where to go, and they find the entrance to the tortoise. But in the book, the entire army is looking for this cave on the back of the mountain, and it's actually one of the soldiers who finds it and reports it to Naofumi. So Naofumi leads them into the cave, and in the book, it's him, Raftalia, Ost, Eclair, Philo, Rishia, the queen, the old lady, and then a bunch of regular troops. And it has these eyeballs in the walls called installation-type familiars, and they sound really creepy, like just blinking, and they're kind of like the interior defense system for the tortoise. So they had a map that the queen had started from their last trip onto its back, but eventually he decides that the regular troops are just going to hold him back, and he's worried about him getting hurt. So once they get to this open area in the caves, he tells them to stay there. And they keep going forward and end up in a room with more familiars who look like spirit tortoises called guardians. And the shadows show up to help search for the heart. So he leaves Eclair and the old lady behind to protect the soldiers. So we get Naofumi, Raftalia, Ost, Rishia, and the queen, and they go look for the temple. And when they find the temple, this is where they run into the three adventurers who turn out to be Lark, Glass, and Therese. They get attacked by an installation familiar, and they think it's Lark's party controlling the tortoise. And Lark and Therese try not to attack him and end up using their skills to attack monsters, and the tunnel collapses. So they get separated. And they get attacked by a mimic-type familiar that looks like Lark and Glass. In the show, they just kind of bump into each other, and Naofumi's like, if you're not going to attack us, I don't care. And they just sort of go their own ways. But I like this in the book because Naofumi reacts pretty much how you'd expect, where he immediately wants to fight them and thinks they're after him. So they have to keep searching, and they go find a different temple where Naofumi makes out the words head and heart. And the idea he comes up with is to destroy the head and the heart simultaneously. So they go reunite with the soldiers. He leaves the queen behind with them, along with Eclair, the old lady, and Rishia. They eventually find a trap door after a bunch of searching, and it was a familiar covering the path that they needed to go through. It's like a closed-off flesh path, and Ost opens it. And they find the Hourglass of Souls like in the show, but it's just a copy. So Ost realizes that they also need to destroy the core of the beast, and that the head and the heart won't be enough, and that the head and heart will only be enough to stop it from moving for a little bit. So they find the heart, and it has the eyeballs like in the show. It starts attacking them with magic. Raftalia and Philo coordinate with Vittoria, and they destroy the head and the heart at the same time. And Naofumi figures out that since Ost is alive, that the tortoise is still alive. And he really has a lot of appreciation for her as this goes on, because she's in a lot of pain, but she's still asking them to kill her. The head and the heart start healing themselves, even though they destroy both, and they have to retreat to the troops that they left behind in the open area and leave the heart alone. So they regroup with the troops who lost some men while they were away, and obviously this is all stuff that's just exclusive to the book, if you've seen the show. They all go to the heart together this time, with troops dying along the way, but their job is to cast a sealing spell, and the heart retaliates, and some of the wizards die when they try to seal it. I like all this stuff because they really go through a lot of shit to stop the tortoise and really play up the power of these four great monsters in their world. And the show, it's 6 episodes, but it feels like they really rush through it, if you consider that they don't even fight the tortoise until episode 3. So they try it again and get the heart stopped, but only for a minute before it just starts beating again. Ost tells them to destroy the head and the heart, and then seal the heart, and the core will open up. And she casts a spell, and the path to the core opens up. And they send the troops back with the queen, and Naofumi and his party go onto the core once they've accomplished this. He acknowledges that Rishia has been surprisingly helpful in these fights, and she's really improving throughout their time together. And the next chapter is where they find the heroes trapped and the bad guy Kyo, and this is about where episode 5 ends. And he explains that he's using the power of the 3 heroes to fuel the tortoise, and that's why it's so powerful. And they bicker and talk shit a little bit in the book, and then they fight. And Kyo attacks with his pages a lot, and he does a mixture of attacking just with the pages and then turning the pages into other things, which the show did an okay job of, but I like the idea of him just having these pages flying everywhere as a weapon and a shield. He attacks with the pages. Eclair, Rishia, the old lady, Raftalia, and Philo all fight the pages off, and they go back and forth, and then he calls in 10 familiars of the Guardian type, and Naofumi's hesitant to use the Shield of Wrath in case the other heroes get caught up in it. He could kill them. And they're getting kind of overwhelmed by Kyo and the familiars together. And he decides to use the Shield of Wrath, and that's when Therese, Glass, and Lark show up. So at first, Naofumi thinks that they're sandwiched between enemies, and Lark says that they're on the same side for now, and that their vassal weapons are crying. And then essentially what you're going to find out later, or soon, is that Kyo took the vassal weapon against his will. The weapon didn't choose him, he's forcing himself on it, essentially. And that's the explanation for this, and that they're not allowed to take over, and the vassal weapons are crying because they're not allowed to take over protective beasts from any world. We also get a really important explanation here, because Lark is a lot weaker. And he says he's level 75 in this world, but when the wave is open and their worlds are connected, his level combines from both of those worlds. So he was way more powerful. And the fighting continues, and Naofumi and Lark team up, and Lark uses a defense raiding attack to destroy Kyo's barrier. And Kyo puts up a bunch of barriers, and then the old lady tears them apart. And this is where he uses the gravity attack like they did in the show. And in the book, Rishia, Oast, Glass, and the old lady can stand up. And we find out here that Glass is a spirit person, which is why Naofumi's soul leader shield was really effective on her. So he tosses her a soul healing water, and it really powers her up. So Oast grabs a hold of Naofumi's shield so they can team up to use a spell, and this is where he uses the All Liberation Aura. And he describes it in his head as like putting a puzzle together to cast it, and it impacts all of his allies, and it's higher than Drifa magic, which he thought was the highest level. And this is where everyone powers up and attacks, and they figure out the truth about Oast being the soul of the spirit tortoise manifest in human form. Kyo takes her and takes the energy from the souls that the tortoise gathered. Naofumi and his party are getting dominated, and this is where Rishia has her awakening. And it's really awesome in the book because they've slowly built up that she has all this potential with the life force power and the Hengen Muso style. And finally she gets so pissed off that it really comes out. And they did a decent job in the anime with it, but if you don't know any of the background, or if you've only watched the anime, I could easily see how it might be confusing. Like, why is she suddenly so powerful? This is where she frees the heroes, like she does in the show. And Lark gets really pissed off at Kyo because they're from the same world. So him and Glass and Therese all start attacking him. And Naofumi uses this opportunity to try to sneak to the core, but he can't use the Shield of Wrath. It just won't come out. And this is when the Spirit Tortoise Heart Shield comes out. In the book, it seems like it's more of his decision to destroy the core, even though he knows it's going to kill Oast, than in the show where she just forces it. It's not really a big deal, but I do like the idea of him resolving himself to do what he has to, even though he knows his friend is going to die. And then this is where Kyo runs with his little vial of some of the souls, and Oast is dying, so she says her goodbyes with Naofumi and his party. And it's a huge bummer in the book, because by this point you've been with her for like a book and a half, off and on. And she pretty much thanks everybody, and she says she's glad that she was able to be friends with a hero instead of his enemy. And Naofumi gives her a bit of a hard time, which I like because that kind of goes with how he is. And he's like, why couldn't you be mean to people so that they wouldn't like you if they had to kill you? And Raphtalia like, Naofumi, don't be that way. And he's like, I probably shouldn't criticize a dying woman. And this is where she tells him that the Phoenix will be the next great beast, and it's way more powerful than her. She touches his shield to give him permission to go to the other world, and Lark and Glass are talking to him through the portal that she opens up. And Oast and Naofumi kind of tear up, and she says she's a little bit glad that he's sad. And then she dissolves into light and floats away. And she also, a small part of her becomes like part of his shield too. And Naofumi, Rishia, Raphtalia, and Philo go through the portal, and he orders Eclair and the old lady to take care of the other three heroes. And initially he's going to leave Rishia behind since they got Itsuki back. But she insists on justice for Kyo, which is him being punished. And this is something that I liked in the book too, is later on he describes that you just have this giant mountain-sized carcass that people are slowly cutting away at for weapons and resources and whatever. In the show, it just kind of dissolves and disappears, but I like that in the book. So they jump through the portal, and the spirit of Oast is watching as they go and prays for their safe return. And there's an extra chapter in here where Glass is praising the soul healing water in Naofumi's world, and Therese is like fawning over the bangle that he made her, and Lark gets really jealous. And it's just a goofy little chapter about their kind of day-to-day after they lost to Naofumi on the islands, and then they came back to his world and what they think of it and stuff like that. So that's kind of a summary of the book, and I tried to highlight some of the big differences. I'm sure there's a bunch of small ones too. I'm not sure I got them all, but it's just kind of a bummer that they're skipping so much stuff. I really thought that this would be like the entire 12 episodes would be what they just jammed into 6. I've enjoyed the season. I don't know if it's confusing for people who have only seen the anime, They haven't really made any huge changes. I just hope that these minor changes don't negatively impact the show in the long run. Because Don Maki did something similar, or Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon did something similar, where they kind of cut out a lot of the stuff that seems small, but a lot of it's world building with the other characters. So when you do that, you end up making the world feel small. I've enjoyed it, and this is the summary between the book and the show. I'll probably do another one after the next 3 episodes, 7, 8, and 9, because I'm assuming that'll be one more book. There's still 2 books left in the arc, so I'm assuming that this next book will be 3 episodes again. And I'll probably do another video after that. All right, see ya.